Okay, I think we might be going live here in 1 second.
Okay, honey. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Let's unmute.
I will be
Sinji.
delayed about 20 seconds, so you can get started.
Let's unmute Sinjin here.
Mm-hmm. Yep, everybody's in.
Okay. Oh, let's get Sinjin unmute here. Hey, everyone. Can you unmute him?
We are live.
He probably can
Yeah.
unmute himself. I just turned my own sound
Thanks.
on. There,
Sinjin,
yeah.
Can you unmute, please?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you,
There we are.
Okay, hello,
just-
Welcome,
everyone.
everybody. Thank you for joining us. What a great pleasure it is to be here with special guest Jennifer Higdon, and also the members of the Apollo Chamber Players, Matt Dietrich, Annabelle Ramirez, Whitney Bullock, and Matthew Dudzik. What a great evening. What a wonderful piece of music. Matt, your first reactions.
Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. I think we have people from all over the globe here, and we'll be taking some questions from people just in a few moments here. But I just want to especially start off by thanking our wonderful composer, Jennifer Higdon, coming at us from Philadelphia. This whole year has been a challenge for everyone, and we did not want to we wanted to take the bull by its horns and enter the digital universe and present her premiere. And I think it makes it even more meaningful doing it in this circumstance. So I think music can help bridge many of the divides we have today in our society, and just bring beauty to people. And I think Jennifer's music just encapsulates that to the millionth degree. So
thank you, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure, Jennifer.
Bravo to the quartet too. It was a spectacular performance. So I have to applaud you, and with deep gratitude for all the work you've put in on this. And I think one of the most challenging rehearsal situations I have ever experienced. It was pretty impressive, the problem solving, trying to do it with great distance during a pandemic. But man, you all pulled it off. So bravo. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. You were so patient. You were so patient with us the entire time, and we have the notes and a lot of some of the recordings in the beginning will never be made public. The rehearsal recordings.
What was that rehearsal process? Briefly, how did you go about the rehearsal process?
Well, we tried Zoom a couple of times, but because of the delay, it wasn't really working very well.
And it was also before Zoom changed its sound, too. There were a lot of complaints about what we initially got. It sounded like the string quartet was in a tin can about 600 yards down from me. And I think the Zoom folks got a lot of complaints about this issue and actually changed some aspects of their sound. There was a lot of discussion about it. So I've got to hand it to the quartet to be able to really, be persistent. Even when the Zoom wasn't working, you switched to video and then MP3s. It was the perfect way to do it. It's odd because you can't try everything immediately. I would have said, oh, can you try this like this? So, it's just, you figure out how to make it work. But when you have really good musicians, you can do that.
And I should mention our wonderful audio engineer, Ryan Edwards. He came to some of our rehearsals and set up a tripod and some of his equipment. And so we got some good recordings to send back to Jennifer for some comments. And sometimes we would send back different sections, played different ways too, since we weren't there in real time. And I think that was really helpful. So well, why don't we start off with some questions? And we have a couple to begin with. We have a couple people pre-selected here to start things off. Jose Hernandez is here in Houston, Texas. He's a composer himself, and we're going to turn over the first question to him. Oh, you need to unmute, Jose. There you go.
Okay, there we go. I just wanted to say, great piece, great performance, and it was great to get to catch that. Definitely missing live music, but it was just a fantastic performance. As a spectator of Apollo, I love your sound, and it was just very wonderful to hear.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, it was a great piece, and I had just been to those mountains about 3 weeks ago with my fiance, so it was great to see, because you never, it does look like it's burning. I mean, it's an interesting experience. I'm from Mexico, and I've never seen anything like that, and it was a very interesting experience to see all of that, and it was very new. So that was also adding another layer to the listening experience. Ms. Higdon, I'd like to ask about the experience, your experience of working with different types of programming, and how you kind of relate to those choices, as well as how you can balance deadlines and space for creative work when you're working on those.
Yeah, it's a good question. I always keep a calendar. I am fortunate I get to pretty much spend every day writing for me. So I make my living from the writing aspect. I teach 2 hours a week, which is not a lot, but I'm constantly thinking about, the first priority in my life is always the composition. Everything else gets slotted in behind the composition. And I just make sure that I am basically getting through a certain amount of music every week, because normally I know what's going to happen in terms of delivery of pieces. This piece, I think I delivered to the quartet, man, it was a year and a half or 2 years ago. It was the last thing I wrote before starting my second opera. And I knew the opera takes a lot of room in your head, and I knew I needed to finish the quartet for these guys, because I wouldn't be able to stop in the middle. It's like driving a giant Mack truck and you can't just slam on the brakes. So I plan everything out in the composing. And I often tell composers, we're always talking about this at Curtis, the strategy is just like when you practice an instrument. Actually, writing music is the exact same thing, because you're practicing using your brain. It's a muscle, just like a pianist would have to like play every day. And so I make sure I'm writing every day at some point, even if it's only for an hour or something like that. But normally in a day, I get in between 4 and 6 hours of writing. Depends on how much. But life is an interesting balancing act. And you know what? The truth is that we don't really know. Everybody has to do this differently. People ask me all the time, they're like, how do you have balance in your life? And I'm like, oh, don't ask me that. I have no balance in my life whatsoever. So, oh, it's not easy being a composer, but there's a lot of joy in it, I have to say. There really is.
Yeah, Jennifer, you got us the part in early 2019, I believe. So
Yeah.
we worked on it at certain moments, and started to kind of get it in our fingers.
My stuff always looks really easy when you look at it,
Yeah.
and then when you start to assemble it, you're like, oh my gosh. Every single group, from the Philadelphia Orchestra to the junior high band out here in the suburbs of Philly, has told me the same thing. They're like, it looked easy on the part, but then when you start assembling it, and I'm like, yeah. Sometimes I warn ensembles. I'm like, listen. But for you guys, this was one of the things I remember thinking. I love writing string quartets. So it's a very natural thing for me. But I knew once I started the second opera that my brain would be gone. And it literally, I think I worked on that opera for like 16 months. So I wanted to make sure your piece kind of had time to simmer in my head before I began the process where all of my brain cells were going in that direction. So.
Yeah, so thank you for answering the question, as well as it provides good insight, because similarly, it's kind of like you get these big programs and you realize, oh my God, this is a lot more work that I anticipated. So I have to just kind of like, get through the work. I realize that the 9 to 5 sounds lovely now, as opposed to working late into the night. I don't know. It's just it's great advice to hear that, or it's great to hear that I'm not the only one dealing with like, okay, I gotta get more balance in my work life and my creative space. And I think it was George Santakis, but he said something about your music will never be greater than your life. So I really want to make sure that I live like I have time to live, so that my music is good as well. Yeah.
That's a good point. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And balance sometimes also means just taking the time to do the thing that you love. So if you love composing, making sure that's a part of your day makes the rest of the day go a little bit better.
Yeah.
Before we open it to the floor here, we have one more question from actually one of our project composers. His name is Erberk Erilmaz, and he's joining us from Ankara, Turkey. And I'm wondering what time it is there for you, Erberk.
It's 5:15 a.m., but this is an amazing experience for us all, so we wanted to join. What a great way to start the day.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes. Yes, what a great piece. I've seen so many of Apollo's like premieres in Houston. Great experience and playing with them, writing for them. But what an amazing way to end the whole project. It's really amazing. We ask our students at Ankara Music and Fine Arts University. They were studying the piece and they came up with some questions. Of course, they wrote these when they were awake before the premiere, but they could hear the piece and they could see the score. That was great. And so these are questions from Eylem, Ayşenur, Yusuf, and İdil. These are their names. Their first question is, what was your starting point for the construction of the work? Was it a musical idea, or considering the title, was it an extra musical idea?
Oh, it was actually both. Now that I think about it, the musical ideas were coming from the opera, which has a kind of a Southern Appalachian feel because that novel is about that part of the country, but also a part of the country that I grew up in, which has a distinctly different sound from where I live now, the Northeast. So the ideas, the musical themes, and the harmonic construction were coming out of an opera, but they had to be refashioned and new music had to be written to kind of, I thought of it like a quilt, which is a giant blanket with all these panels, and you're kind of trying to sew them together so that they fit and they have a logical flow and that they work on the instruments. So it's actually both of the things it's both things, which I find sometimes there's like never a simple answer in these compositions. It's often like the inspiration comes from here, and it's amazing how many different places it comes from.
Mm-hmm. We have one more question if we have one more minute. You partly explained this in the premiere. They ask, is it possible to make connections between your work and your culture, or your work and your past experiences? We are here at a university where we can study regional Turkish music, traditional music, and also Western music. So they were curious about your perspective on the music that surrounds you.
Yes, there's two answers to this. In this particular piece, it feels to me to be the truest to what I grew up around. A lot of bluegrass, people fiddling. When I wrote Cold Mountain, this was a really strange coincidence. One of the singers, one of the characters, was also the guy who sang, Kevin Burdett is saying this character, was also from East Tennessee like I was. And I don't know how I knew this. There was an overlap, and a accompanist I'd used was one of his coaches. We knew that he played violin. He's actually a baritone, or he's a bass, I guess, actually. And he plays violin. So I realized because this was a Southern story in the Appalachian region, I had debated using genuine folk songs. I only used one of them in the entire opera, but I did not use it in the string quartet. But it was amazing how naturally this music came out for me. And I think it was because I grew up around that kind of sound, more of that kind of sound than classical. Strangely, we just didn't have a lot of classical in my household. But also all the music I listened to as a kid growing up was pop music. My dad was an artist who worked at home. He always had the radio on. And so I think my sense of timing and music, my brain maybe is hardwired to change ideas faster. Strangely, just from hearing so much pop music growing up. And I'm talking about the Beatles and early reggae and Bob Dylan and 60s folk. But to me, I'm always listening to music. It all feeds in. But this particular piece felt there was something so natural. I could almost feel the music onto the page more than sitting there kind of analyzing and thinking, how am I going to do this? What's going to work theoretically? So definitely cultural connections, and it felt like putting on comfortable shoes. basically.
Mhm.
Good question, though.
Yes.
Tell your students. That's a good one.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank
So nice
you.
to so nice to meet you here, and hopefully we can have you and Apollo in Ankara one day.
Sounds good.
Yes.
I gotta say, it's kind of amazing. I have to say kudos to the quartet for having commissioned all these pieces. I have so enjoyed experiencing all of them. I feel like it's like all these different corners of the world, and it almost feels like you're taking a journey through different time periods almost. But I have absolutely loved hearing how we all interact with string quartet and how we bring aspects of our culture to the experience, whether it's extra instruments or dancers or astronauts. It really, that takes vision for the people who do that, but also for the people who commission the works. They are very much a part of the process. So I enjoyed listening to your piece. I enjoyed listening to all of them. It was kind of a delight. It was like the biggest box of incredible chocolates, to experience it all.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. We're so proud of all the composers that we've worked with, and just so honored to have worked with them. So
maybe we can go to Nicole Iglesias. Are you still with us, Nicole? How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys doing today?
Good, thank you.
Hello.
Please, you've got a great question. Go ahead and ask it.
So as I was listening, I had a two-part question. So my first question is, do you feel as though COVID has hurt or helped your productivity or your imagination for coming up with new pieces? I'm sure everyone's hunkering down, and I find that it's hurt my productivity. I'm a very free-thinking person, and I feel like I like to explore. I grew up in New York City. I live now in Connecticut, so it's a totally different area that I'm in now, and it's a obviously city to suburb, but I feel very constricted now, and I feel like I need the outdoors to help me. And I just wonder if it is helping or hurting, or if you found a way to find your creativity in this time. How did you do that?
This is a good question, Nicole, because I've talked to, I think since the lockdown began, I have spoken with composers every single week. I think I had 1 week that I did not. So I had to quarantine March 8th onwards because I was coming in off the road. It was really interesting. The first thing I thought when I came in, I had a lot of things lined up where I was supposed to be traveling, and I was way behind on my schedule of composing, and I was scheduled to deliver a double percussion concerto, and I was like really, really far behind. And I remember I came in from the road. I'd been out for 3 weeks. And I thought, I may be able to catch up on this, but it was amazing how extraordinarily hard it was to focus. And I think everybody was going through this because your brain is in a fight or flight situation, and trying to concentrate for more than 10 minutes was like impossible. I knew myself, and looking at my deadlines for delivery, I realized I could try to grab at this and try to catch up on my composing schedule. So believe it or not, every day I forced myself to sit down and write. In the first 2 months, literally every day I attempted this, I was only able to concentrate an hour. But what I did was I just kept going back. I knew eventually I would be able to build up stamina. I know everyone I've talked to, we're really exhausted in the beginning. I mean, even now when I get to the end of the day, I just feel completely wiped out. In the beginning, it was like I would compose for 1 hour and then I'd be like, oh my God, that's it. That's all I got in me. So the trick, I thought this is going to be like building muscles. I knew that composing was the one thing I could control during the pandemic. And I thought about the fact that I spend a lot of time anyway in my studio writing. I thought, well, this is actually not any different than what my life is like. So I just made myself just like keep going. I looked at the deadlines and I thought about what I needed to write, and I just kept moving. It sounds strange, but I forced myself. So after about 2 months, I could go 2 hours a day, and it's just been slowly getting better and better. One of the things I did notice, Nicole, and this was a big thing, I was writing at the time this double percussion concerto. Percussion have all kinds of possibilities when you're writing a concerto. You can use drums. You don't have to use any pitched instruments. But I found my need for human connection caused me to decide early on that I was going to write all melodic material, beautiful melodic material for the percussion. They are always saying they don't have that. The violinists have all these great violin concertos, and pianists have great piano concertos. So I made the decision that everything that the two percussionists would be playing, which is actually scheduled to premiere in Houston at some point.
This is for the Houston Symphony, right?
Yeah,
this
it is. Yeah,
even...
exactly. But everything is very melodic, and I can tell it was the pandemic. It was the need to connect with people, to make something beautiful in our world. And I've noticed I've written 3 other chamber pieces since then, and I'm now on a mandolin concerto, and all of it is extraordinarily melodic. It has reached beyond even my normal melodicness. So there's definitely an emotional change, and you just have to kind of push through. So my advice to composers when they're stuck like this is just to dedicate 30 minutes a day and try to write a couple of notes, because eventually those notes build up into a movement, and that builds up into a piece. You put it all together. So hang in there. We're all going through the same thing. It's not so easy, is it? But you know what? The world needs the arts right now. The world desperately needs us. Yeah.
And I also admire your library in the back. It's a wonderful looking library. I have a second question that I thought of, because I did serve in the Navy, and I had a relationship with, speaking of just difficult times to go through, I had a very unconventional childhood, and music for me was that outlet. Even as a young child, I was one of the youngest, not that I made a big impact, but I was one of the youngest little band members in 3rd grade playing the clarinet. I'm a wind instrument person as well. And I just was wondering, I played in the Navy. I went in and they asked if anyone had played instruments in the past, and you got put in a separate section to perform at, like 3 different graduations before your own, and then you play at your own graduation, which is great. And then you play in the future in the Navy. Do you think that they should, because obviously the Navy doesn't have like a wide selection of options for music. Do you think that they should broaden this to some classical music, because it was very structured? Obviously, military music, band music, war music is very structured. It's very, in my opinion, it was a little outdated. It wasn't as, like hip as it should be, or like, as you were saying earlier, before the concert, if you're entertaining a younger crowd, you want to catch that attention of the younger kids. Do you think that there would be any possibility for them to maybe broaden that, and how that would benefit, just teaching us more about different kinds of music, not just what they've been doing for decades?
Yeah. First of all, let me say, Nicole, thank you for your service. I think that's the important thing. Thank you for that.
It was cool.
Yeah. And you know what? Actually, some of the military bands they are starting to do more music like mine. I have done arrangements for the President's Own Marine Band, the President's Own, the Chamber Orchestra, and the chamber groups under have also done my music. And I know the U.S. Air Force and the Coast Guard Band has done stuff. So I have been slowly working a lot of times with these bands. I'll make arrangements of orchestra pieces of mine into something that they can use in their services. So it's really, I think it's changing. I think it's really important. There is music out there. In fact, when I was listening to this, I thought, at some point I should make arrangement of this for band. I literally thought that. I thought, I hadn't really thought about it. But because I started in band, I know what you mean. And one of the pieces I did when I was a little younger as a composer was I was commissioned to write a piece for junior high band, which was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It turns out it's easier to write for the professional groups. When you're thinking about a junior high group, you're thinking, what are the restrictions the kids can and cannot do? The range is like a fifth, they can't go over eighth notes. But the thing is, you also, like you said, a lot of times we have a lot of band music and things that are kind of square and formulaic. So trying to create things that move out of that boundary, which maybe, Nicole, you should think about writing some stuff. Have you thought about it?
I have not. I don't know anything about writing music, but it's not something that I'm too afraid of. It is so complex, as I'm taking a music history class with Professor Arthur Hernandez here in Connecticut. But it is like there's so much more. And like I grew up in a Hispanic household, so we listened to a lot of percussion. We had a lot of drums, a lot of congos, a lot of maracas. So we knew about being on beat, and it's just there's so much. Like now we're learning about Renaissance and medieval times, and there's so much that I did not know of just the history of music in general, about concert music and the masses and the church and how it came about. So I just wish that was more celebrated and introduced to kids at a younger age, or even if you want to go and pursue even the military and you have a musical background, they should introduce that, because it's so interesting to see where it came from. It didn't just manifest somewhere; it came from somewhere, and people are perfecting it every day.
Yeah, good,
Hey,
good
Nicole.
observations.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you. Maybe we can go next to Richard Jimenez. Welcome, Richard.
Hi, good evening, everybody, and hello, Jennifer. What a
Richard.
great piece of work. Congratulations. Excuse me. I wondered, Jennifer, you mentioned that you had not you didn't grow up with classical music, but later got to know it and embraced it. And is there a particular classical musician, composer who inspires you?
Oh boy, it's hard to pick one, but I have to say, some of my earlier experiences were in classical music were with Aaron Copland, Claude Debussy, Maurice Ravel. I think those probably, and then I got to know Samuel Barber's music. So it's probably, for me, is the French American school. It's the French school, the Impressionists, and also kind of the American school. I had to learn, it's funny, I kind of learned it all backwards. When I went off to college to study music, I didn't even know the Beethoven symphonies. I can't imagine what my teachers must have thought. In reality, it must have been kind of, they probably were like, and you know what, I still have sometimes, occasionally, a teacher will say to me, I don't remember you coming through this school, and how did you get to this point? How did this happen? And the thing was, the answer actually is just, I loved music so much that I wasn't discouraged when people told me, there's no way you can do this. You don't know anything about classical music. I just kind of plowed ahead, and I've always just kind of kept on a steady pace. You know, it's funny, my opera Cold Mountain, I think the main character, Inman, is walking from a battlefield near Richmond. He walks all the way back to western North Carolina. And I think about that, the journey that man made, how many steps. And I used to hike a lot. So at one point I hiked across the Grand Canyon, which was like 26.5 miles. It's a really hefty hike. And you think when you are hiking a lot of times, it's really a matter of just putting one foot in front of the other. It was the same thing learning about the classical music. It was just putting one foot in front of the other and just not giving up. And I loved it so much. It was kind of a joy, the learning and the experience. So, and I am still learning, to be quite honest. I feel like I'm studying all kinds of mandolin music right now because I'm writing for mandolin, and I'm like, oh, this is not so easy. But that keeps it fresh. So it's quite the experience. One step at a time, though. It's like one note at a time also.
Hey, thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Felicia Watley, are you there? You have a wonderful question for Jennifer.
Hi, yes. I just wanted to say, first of all, that was all very lovely and inspiring. I'm also a student. I want to hear more about what's to come. I think it'd be great. Where can we see you next?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, it's funny. I must have had 6 world premieres that were postponed. It's wait, where are you located?
I'm also in Connecticut, but I have Southern
Connecticut. Yeah, I've had quite a few concerts recently in Connecticut with the various orchestras up there. I have to say, I don't know what the concert situation is right now. I am having pieces played, and a lot of times we'll post things on my website, which is just my name. I have to literally go on the website and look, believe it or not. I can't remember. But I think, like last week, I had 4 chamber concerts in various places. So some of this stuff is getting streamed online. This is how I find out about it. I see the announcement of the streaming, and then I tune in. I'm like, oh, yeah, I recognize that piece. It's really embarrassing when you hear something, you say, wow, that sounds really familiar. What is that? And you sit there and you're like, what is that? What is that? And you go, oh, wait, that's mine. It's kind of like...
How often does that happen? Truly, Jennifer.
It actually has happened quite a few times. I walked into Curtis last year, and I was like, wow, that sounds really familiar. And I used to panic when I was a student about the drop the needle exams. They don't have those anymore, but the little musical excerpts that you identify. And I think I went through so much trauma going through those classes for the master's and the doctorate that I was like, I'm never going to recover from this. So when I hear excerpts, I go, what is that? Not realizing sometimes it's something that I wrote maybe 20 years ago, and I've just kind of forgotten about it. So
So actually, I have a question about the drop the needle because, myself and my colleagues have been out of school for about, I don't know, 15, 20 years now.
Mhm.
Is your music used for drop the needle in schools anymore? I guess I'll throw that oh yes, out to the students there. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really shockingly. I did a lecture a couple years ago. I think this was University of Missouri, Kansas City. I went into a classroom. It was a music history classroom, and the teacher said, "Please open your Grout book to page 327." I said, "Why are they opening the Grout?" And they said, there's a section in there on you. And I was really traumatized by Grout when I was going through school because I had to outline the whole thing. So I kind of had a moment where I was like, "What do you mean?" And I looked at one of the books, and there was my picture in the book. I was like, it was a little, and then I apologized for the trauma I was causing students. But I guess, it's weird. It does show up on things. I'm surprised. I would probably flunk the test if my piece showed up. I wouldn't recognize it. I'm pretty sure.
Hey, thank you, Felicia. Christina, are you there? Have a question.
I'm here. Hi, Jennifer.
Hey, Christina. Yeah, I'm surprised you have any kind of questions. She wrote a book on me.
Oh, okay.
She was one of the few people allowed into the dress rehearsal for Cold Mountain. It was a closed rehearsal, but Santa Fe Opera gave her permission to come in. So good to see you, Christina.
Yes, good. Congratulations. That was amazing. That was amazing.
Thank you.
I was wondering, I know that when you have commissioned other people in the past, that you have had like a lot of contact about what kind of music do you like? I was wondering if you did that with the Apollo as well.
That's a good question. I remember us talking. I met Matt. Was that literally 6 years ago, Matt? Is that
I think
right?
we met in the spring of 2015, and I had sent an email a little bit before that, and then you actually Facebook messaged and said, "I'm going to be doing a Houston Symphony pre-concert talk. If you can come." And I remember I saw that half an hour before the concert. I was lounging on my couch on a Sunday afternoon, and I said, "Crap, I got to go to this." So I did. I went downtown. I got a ticket, and I saw your lecture beforehand. And I remember you were talking about groups that inspired you for their new music focus. And you mentioned Bang on a Can, and you mentioned Eighth Blackbird, and I was thinking I wanted Apollo to be in that same space.
And so you are.
Yeah, well. But then, you were so gracious to talk to me afterwards. And I remember you told me, you said, I have 2 operas to write. And if you can wait, then I can probably get you in sometime. And at that time, we had a lot of time on our hands. So I'm glad that it worked out. We could commission from you. So actually, to answer your question, though, Christina, that's the one and only time that Jennifer and I have met in person. And we were disappointed that she couldn't come in May for the premiere here in Houston, obviously, because we would have had about a week with her to workshop. And that's always like some of the most special moments, is to work with a composer in real time, in person, to really kind of make that relationship more flourish. And then it comes through the music. Yeah, that's.
It was interesting though, Christine. I mean, we really I sent off the music far enough in advance I always wait to hear from performers to see if there's any kind of an issue. But because this was like string quartet 6 or 7 for me, I feel like I know the instruments. I've written so much for strings, so they didn't, like when I went to write the piece for Hilary Hahn, the violin concerto, I was like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of violin concerto repertoire. I had to learn a lot, but this felt more natural, and we were talking about different cultural angles too. That was the other thing. And so for me, the logical thing when someone says cultural angle, I immediately think of Appalachian music and bluegrass, and there's just a sound world that swirls in my head completely. And Christina, I think you focused on my bluegrass concerto also in your book. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, Concerto 4-3.
Yeah, so you've actually heard kind of the southern side of my music. Some people are surprised when they hear this side of my music. I get people saying, "Whoa, this sounds different." I'm like, "Oh, this is actually probably as close to me as you can really get, to be quite honest."
If I could just say one thing, I don't want to interrupt, but I was talking in my 20th century class about George Crumb and the voice of the whale, and they wear masks when they perform it. And I thought, and now I'm watching Jennifer Higdon's performers wearing masks. And it's a of life kind of thing.
Oh my gosh, I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. You know, because George was my teacher. It's like you're absolutely right. I hadn't thought about that. He just turned 91. Literally like a couple of days ago. I did think about, but you know what? George Crumb is an interesting example because when I took lessons with him, I remember him talking about being haunted by the sounds. He's from the same area, from West Virginia. He said, oh, those sounds coming out of the mountains, the haunted sounds. And I remember thinking about when I lived, because when I lived on this farm, we were quite a ways from anyone, but you could hear coyotes. You could also hear mountain lions screaming in the night, and you could hear things that were very distorted at a great distance. And that's in George Crumb's music in a very different context, but it's the exact same thing, actually. I realized we both were hearing aspects of the mountains because the mountains create a lot of sounds within themselves. There's such an ecosystem of sound, but they also bend sound, the air and the wind and nature. It's a different sound that way. So it's connected. It's absolutely connected. Masks and music.
Hey, Christina, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madison Nicole Ryan, how are you?
Hey,
Madison, I think you're muted.
Oh. Uh-oh.
There, yeah, no, I hear you.
Oh,
there you go.
We got you.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay, good. So my question today, as a creative person, somebody who's made their living being creative, what are some moments when you've had kind of creative burnout or artistic burnout, and what did you do to overcome those moments?
That's an important question, actually, Ness. And I have to say, every time I start a piece, it's like weeks of agony. It's actually the absolute worst part of what I do. And my cats will attest to this, I suffer and I torture everyone around me in reality, because trying to figure out, and I'm like, what am I doing? I have no idea what I'm gonna do, and I have no idea if this is gonna work, and this will be the moment when everyone figures out I'm a fraud. It's a real complex. It's a real thing, and we call it imposter syndrome. We actually have a name when we do coachings in the arts. People go through, and I have that all the time. You can get a burnout feeling, and the trick is to try to remember back. I tell students all the time, remember back to that. There was a moment in your past where you were at a concert and you were absolutely thrilled, and something really just kind of was like an electrical jolt in you. Trying to remember back to that time period is important. It can also be difficult when you're going through school, when you're in university, because you're taking so many classes and it's such a regimented schedule, whether it's solfege or ear training, it's counterpoint, it's harmony, it's keyboard studies. I mean, the list is just incredible, and you can really feel burned out from trying to go through all those things. And then you have maybe 10 minutes in a day where you can practice your instrument, which you were like, this is the thing I thought I was going to be doing. But the trick is to try to find a little bit of the balance that we talked about earlier, to try to protect that little flame of care that you experienced when you first decided you were going to do music. I also tell students sometimes, if you're having problems, back off and listen to something else. Listen to some other kind of music. That makes your brain release the thing it's wrestling with, and sometimes the solution will come to you. And then sometimes I say, just go out and take a walk in nature. Sometimes that helps. But don't give up. That's the first thing. You can find a solution through this. We all as artists, and for that matter, living through life, you always have barriers. And your whole life, you're going to be either trying to find your way around the barrier or over the barrier or through the barrier. And the trick in life is just to keep your feet moving and don't give up. So you may have to climb from the North Rim of the Grand Canyon down across and up the South Rim. But the choice of not doing it, if you're crossing the Grand Canyon, is you're going to die. I think if I'm not creating something creatively, I don't feel like I can live. So the trick is to find the thing that works for you to get over the hill or through the hill or around the hill. Just don't give up.
Hey, thank you, Madison.
Good question.
And let's move on to a familiar name, Joe Dietrich, who, if I'm not mistaken, is the father of Matt and the father-in-law of Annabelle. Joe, welcome.
Hi, Mom and Dad.
Yes, Joe and Oni Dietrich from Southern Pennsylvania. And,
yeah.
Yes.
This better be a good question.
The pressure's on.
Well, it's a two-part question. I think you answered part A. I just was curious about other mountain music artists that have been influential early on, like the Carter family, Mother Maybelle, Earl Scruggs, Woody Guthrie, and those genres. And second part is I play the guitar, banjo, and hammer and dulcimer. I wondered if mountain dulcimer or hammer dulcimer is something you might have made a composition for.
You know, the first answer is I started my experience with bluegrass listening to people, just amateurs, play up in the mountains. But I also was very aware. I became really super aware, I think, of country music and mountain music when I started hearing Alison Krauss.
Love her. Yes.
Yeah, phenomenal artist. And actually, I think maybe the woman with the most Grammys. I think she has like 25 or 26 or something like that. And because I also grew up in East Tennessee, Dolly Parton, who lived a couple of hollers over from me, we're always aware of Dolly. This was a really big thing because also in the area I lived in, literacy was not a big thing. Like in my county, I think the reading level was at 8th grade level. Dolly Parton's father was illiterate. He couldn't read. And so she started a program. It started in East Tennessee where when a kid was born, she would send a book to that kid every month of its life up through the age of 6. So we were really aware in East Tennessee about her literacy program. But I remember being just impressed by her ability to put that together. Now it's a worldwide program. But after a while, I started investigating. You know, you would hear it in East Tennessee everywhere. You'd hear Dolly everywhere, Johnny Cash, all the countries that went through all the phases, old country and new country. And as I've kind of backed up going from the new country into the old and the bluegrass, when I had to write a bluegrass concerto, I really had to look at what is bluegrass, because trying to figure out how to write that as a classical composer was a challenge. I've always wanted to write for hammer dulcimer. I know George Crumb, my teacher, has done that because he was trying to make the sounds of Appalachia. So I love that sound. Someday I'm going to include it in a piece. Really, it's there's something about that sound that's completely arresting to me. I absolutely love it. So, and banjo sounds like a good possibility too.
I feel another commission coming on, Mom and Dad.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I promise I didn't screen that question. They weren't supposed to. Thank
good
you,
question.
Mom and Dad. Good question.
Let's take another question. Who would like to ask the next question?
Anything at all, I'll answer. I was going to say my cat will answer, but I think she left. She came in and went out twice, so.
Yes, it looks like we just ran out of questions in the chat. So
I think Jose had one more question, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was just curious about, I really enjoy your piece, Blue Cathedral. And when it comes to injecting, or rather working with a personal narrative into our pieces, I'm wrapping up work now on a piece of mine that's about experiences that I've had in immigrant detention. And it's those kind of heavy things that I always wonder how to kind of relate that to the professional side of the piece, right? Like where we'll live, because I know that the musical conversation will happen in between the audience and the musicians, right? And my conversations with the musicians. So right. I'm just wondering how you feel about working with something like that from yourself into the music.
That's a really good question, Jose. That, you know what, Blue Cathedral, for those of you who don't know, Blue Cathedral is probably my most famous work, I think. It's an orchestra work. I think it's had like 700 performances or something like that. And I started it a year after losing a younger brother to cancer. So I was still really in that deep grieving space. My brother was a year and a half younger than me. And so my answer to you, actually, this is going to sound weird. I didn't think about it in terms of what I was going to put on the page. I just thought about my emotion and feeling. It's a hard thing to explain. How does a composer get emotion and intent and kind of the thing you're feeling on the inside onto a page? And I don't know that there's an actual answer to that. You have to kind of just be feeling it when you're writing. Now, when I was writing Blue Cathedral, I put a couple of things in there that were very personal, which I find sometimes composers will do. Because I'm a flute player, there's a flute solo that starts out in there, and my brother played clarinet, so then the clarinet comes in. So I buried things in the piece that were representative of us, and all the chimes and the little percussion that are playing at the end, those are his birth dates and my birth dates, that we got, like almost like a Morse code. This is something I've not really done much of, but the amount of emotion I was feeling writing that piece was so intense, I think it just kind of spilled out on the page. It sounds strange, but I think it is important to reflect aspects of your culture and your background and what you're writing. And sometimes it's simple stuff like the instruments you use. I mean, this is the thing, George Crumb using hammered dulcimer. He heard it so much in his Appalachian upbringing that I think for him, for it to be true to himself, he had that sound in his pieces. And he has the voice and the interior piano stuff because he talks about the echoes of sound coming through the woods. And I can remember that sort of thing haunting me as well when I was really young. If I went out on the porch at night and was listening to a whippoorwill off in the distance, it was kind of an incredible experience. Charles Ives did the same thing with the marching bands coming through his town. So sometimes you can do it with the rhythm of your culture or the music, the instruments themselves, and sometimes it's literally intent and feeling. But that's the part that's like impossible. It's the magic of any kind of art. How does that appear on a page, in a painting, in a photograph, on a poem, in a tone poem, in a string quartet? It's tricky. The trick as a composer, as anyone who creates, is just to keep trying. You eventually will get it onto the page, but even I find it a mystery how Blue Cathedral works, to be quite honest. And the night before the first reading of that piece, I remember I was so despondent. I thought, oh, this is going to be a disaster. So maybe I don't have a very good sense of how to do this stuff.
No, I thank you for your answer, and I definitely understand all those feelings because you're doing things that seem that come from a different place than the kind of more cerebral compositional, right? Like if you're just working on creating fugues, just regular fugues, and so yeah, I appreciate the answer, and thank you for sharing that about the piece. I'd read that before, but it was great hearing it from you. And I'd also like to thank Apollo for working on me on that piece and on that program.
Yeah, listen, one of the things I tell people this all the time, it scares a lot of music theory teachers. I never think theoretically when I'm writing. I have a lot of theoretical training, but what I do is I trust that the training's there and I just literally write on instinct. I trust that the training will guide me, but I never think about things intellectually. I think about what is the emotion I want to create at this moment? Where do I want to carry the performers and the audience? And how do I make that happen? It's a kind of a radical way to write, but what I do is I'm trusting my training. It's like, for the string players, they practice fingering, they practice the bowing, but that part they let go when they're interpreting. That's almost instinctive. So for composers, that's the same thing. We try to work on an instinctive level in the same sort of way and trust your training to kick in and fill things out. Christina Reitz wrote this book on my music. She found all kinds of things. I'm like, oh, I had no idea that was in there. Follow your heart. That's the answer. Follow your heart.
Jose, thank you very much. We can go, I think, back to Turkey and Denise Bazagor. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. My Turkish is rusty. But Denise, you have a question for Jennifer. I think you're muted at the moment.
He's good.
Yeah,
he's good. Okay.
I think. Hi from Turkey. I'm from Ankara Music and Fine Arts University. Thanks for this event for Jennifer and Apollo chamber players. It was a big earthquake in Izmir, Turkey 2 days ago, and there about 76 people died until now. I hope and I feel that your music goes down. Thanks for amazing music. And I'd like to ask you, what's your motivation while you were writing this music?
Motivation. For me, motivation is always the performers. I always take all of my inspiration from the performers. Maybe it's because when I started out, I was a performance major. And I can remember thinking and feeling that I wanted to have that communication, kind of a spark between the performer and the composer. There's just something about that. But it's always the players, always. But you know, for me also, I guess now that I'm thinking about it for this music, thinking about the mountains, East Tennessee, the Smoky Mountain National Park, Cades Cove around there, and I think a lot about the character in my opera, how far that guy walked through all this nature, climbing mountains where there aren't trails. I climb where there are trails. I think about what is it like to climb over a mountain. So, but you also think about the sorrow and the heft that people carry inside them when they're in bad situations. That's why some of the music I think has kind of a, I don't know, kind of a sorrowfulness, because you think a lot about loss and all. So I hope you and your family are okay. I didn't know about the earthquake. I think the American news didn't carry anything about that, but you all
we have
are
nothing
right.
going on right now in the United States. There's nothing going on that's important.
We
This
I
premiere
didn't hear
was
about
important.
it here, but
Take care of yourself.
Yes,
really,
take care,
stay
Denise.
safe, and thank you.
Thank you.
Are you a composer yourself, Denise?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Also for military band.
Okay. Well, all the best from Texas and the United States.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I was actually thinking maybe if go ahead, Sinjin.
No, I was just going to say, one of the things that strikes me, Jennifer, when you talk about where you came from musically, that when you started in music school, that you had no classical background and you had never heard the Beethoven symphonies, etc. And then you talk about when you were writing Cold Mountain and the influence of bluegrass, mountain music, etc. What is your understanding or definition of what classical music is?
Boy, I don't think I have a definition, because I think it's ever evolving. I think it, especially recently, it feels like in the past 20 years that the lines we used to draw between band music and orchestra music and movie music and pop music, I feel like it's melding together in an interesting way. And maybe it's because a couple of times I've been challenged to write bluegrass related. Bluegrass feels very different to me than classical, but because I didn't grow up on classical, somehow my imagination is able to smash music together. I don't know what that is, but I feel like also because of the internet and the fact that we have access to so much music, it has also changed the way the world hears all music, and that the world likes a variety. I think once the iPod, I don't remember when the iPod first came out, there was an iPod shuffle, and people would literally, I'd go to universities and ask students, what are you listening to? What's on your iPod? And they had the widest variety of stuff. And I realized that people were listening to a mix of music, that they were no longer just segregated into I'm listening to jazz, or I'm listening to bluegrass, or I'm listening to pop or country. Everyone listens to everything. And I think that has changed our concert experience. And the perfect example is the Apollo Chamber Players. I mean, the variety of music in this series is absolutely incredible. It's astounding. It's actually quite an incredible achievement, too. I don't know if I know of a group that has commissioned such a wide variety of cultural backgrounds. I mean, it's amazing. The music sounds so different, but I think that's also the way we hear things. So I think classical is kind of shifting, but I think it's an ever-changing. I mean, people point out to me, they're like, wow, you're like 200 or 300 years from older than the music that's being played with orchestras. I hear that a lot, but I'm frequently on with Beethoven. I'm on with the standard repertoire all the time, because I usually, in a normal year, will have 70 to 80 orchestra performances. So I spend a lot of time with Beethoven. I'm often with Beethoven's string quartets too, somehow. But I think it's an amalgamation of a lot of different things. And the thing that I love about projects like this is it allows us to have a classical music of our time. This is the way we notate our time period, what we're experiencing, the energy level, the languages, musical and literal, but also the combining of things like Apollo working with astronauts and dance. It's really rich. I think it's right to be born into another sort of sound world. It's fascinating. I'm glad to be alive now. It's a much better time to be a composer than it was in Mozart and Beethoven's time. Those guys had it really, they had it hard. I think about, Beethoven had a performance of his violin concerto, and it was like 20 years to the next performance. Now, my violin concerto is 10 years old, and it's had like 12 different violinists do it, and next week it's being done in New Zealand. So it's,
wow.
I'm lucky because I get a lot more performances than Mozart got and Beethoven got in their lifetime. It's my life. I get repeat performances. Those guys didn't get many repeat performances. So in many ways, it's better to be a composer now.
Could I ask where you see classical music in 25 or 50 years? Is that?
Oh, yeah. You know what? I try not to think that far out because I think it's like this whole, I always think it's impossible to predict. And I literally take my journey one step at a time. I try not to look too far out in advance because I'm always focused on writing something. I'm literally always focused on that thing. And I figure other people will figure that out as it goes. And I'll try to write the most communicative music that I can. That's usually and I literally, that takes so much of my brain power. My brain power just focuses on that, literally that little picture.
Do we have any more questions? We're almost out of time, but there is Elizabeth Eaton. Apparently, you were at Bowling Green with. She says hi.
Yes. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Elizabeth. I know, there's a bunch of people at Bowling Green who know me as a flute player.
Yes.
I actually run into people who are like, you're not playing flute anymore? Oh my gosh. You're not in music anymore? And I'm like, well, I am in music, but a little different side of it. But Bowling Green had a lot of new music. I have to say,
yes,
there was a lot of new music. Yeah. And so I think the festival they have there every year was kind of an eye opener for me. And Judy Bentley, my teacher, we were always studying new music. So it's, but it's good to see you.
Thanks. Yay.
Blast
from the past. Yeah,
yes, really. I know. It's funny. I haven't played my flute in like 15 years now, and I feel like the flute player has revoked my license to operate my flute. So, oh boy!
But you never know it writing for strings, Jennifer. You write beautifully for strings, so I think yeah.
It's okay. I've earned my wings on another aspect of music. Yeah.
You have written for solo flute, haven't you?
I have. I actually have quite a few works for flute and chamber settings, but my next concerto after the mandolin is a flute concerto for the National Flute Association for their 50th anniversary, and I'm terrified. I think I know too much of the repertoire or something. There's something really scary when you really know the repertoire. It's a very different mental and emotional angle than when you're exploring other instruments. So we'll hope it works. Scary.
Well, I think we have to wrap up. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your interest. And we want to say a very big thank you, obviously, to Jennifer for being so generous with her time and generous with her music as well. And thank you to Matt, Annabelle, Whitney, and Matthew from the Apollo Chamber.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everybody.
As we close here, just a quick note that we will be recording this commission in the next few months, and hopefully at some point presenting it for a live audience post-pandemic here. So, and I think it will be played by many other ensembles too. So I'm glad that we were able to help birth this to the world. Jennifer,
thank you, Apollo
so
Chamber players, the board members and our donors and everything. Thank you all. Wonderful job.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Take care now. Bye-bye.